Howdy, 8th grade. Today we're going to talk about how to solve some problems that have absolute values in them. So we've looked at absolute values a little bit before. I'm hoping you recognize them, but we really haven't worked with them that much. So an absolute value is when you have something like this bracket here. And if I do the absolute value of, say, 5 minus 10, this would end up equaling 5. So all the absolute value means is that we're going to make the inside positive. And that's going to make solving some equations with absolute value a little bit tricky, but that's okay. It's something we can still do. It'll still work. We just have to do a little trick here and there to make it work out. So I want to start just by looking at the equation. The absolute value of x equals 5. So if we have something where the absolute value of x is 5, you could be like a situation where we're saying we are 5 steps away from something. So it doesn't matter if we're to the right or left, we are 5 steps away. Distance, like we talked about in physical science, is an absolute value. So because it's an absolute value, it can be either direction. So there's a lot of different things we can do with this. So if the absolute value of x is 5, let's just look at this intuitively. X could definitely equal 5. And the absolute value of 5 is 5. Or there's another solution. That would be x equals negative 5. And the reason for that is that if we put a negative 5 in here, we take the absolute value, that makes the inside positive. So the absolute value would equal negative 5. X is negative 5. We're good to go. So I want to show you guys kind of how to solve some more complicated ones of these. And it's actually not too hard. So there's two steps. The first step is going to be to isolate our absolute value. Absolute value. And what isolate means is to get it alone. So we're kind of like solving for this whole absolute value chunk. And then the second thing is going to be to solve twice. So there's always going to be two answers to these. We're going to have to solve it twice. So for an example, just we have something to look at. Let's try x plus 3 equals 16. So what we're going to do is first isolate the absolute value. That's already here, so we're good to go. My second step is that I'm going to need to solve this twice. So how I'm going to solve this twice, I'm going to break it up into two chunks. My first chunk here, I'm going to leave it exactly like it is, but just ignore the absolute value. So ignore my absolute value. And if I do that, I have x plus 3 equals 16. My other chunk, I'm going to make my other side negative. So I'm going to negate other side. The reason for that is if x plus 3 is negative 16, this also works. So I have x plus 3 equals negative 16. Then what's inside here would be negative 16, and the absolute value of negative 16 is definitely 16. So I'm going to have to split it up into two equations, one where I just ignore the absolute value, and the other where I negate the other side. And after this I can solve these. I'm going to do that by subtracting 3 from both sides, on both of these actually, and I end up with x equals 13, or x equals negative 19. And that's how my absolute value is going to work, which is pretty nifty. So let's try a couple more just to make sure that we have kind of a hang of it, and then we should be good to go. So these are not generally too bad. I have a couple special cases we got to look at the end, but most of these are going to be pretty simple. So if I do 4 times x minus 2 equals 80. My first step, again, is going to be to isolate my absolute value. So I'm going to take this thing right here. And what I want to do with this when I see it is treat that like a variable and solve for it. So I need to get that by itself. So to do that, I'm going to divide by the 4. Let me get rid of this, dividing by the 4. If I do it to one side, I'm doing it to the other. My 4's cancel here. 80 divided by 4 is going to be 20. So I end up with the absolute value of x minus 2 is going to equal 20. And now that I have it by itself, I can split it up into my two equations. The first one, I just ignore the absolute value. So I get x minus 2 equals 20. That would work. On the other one, I'm going to negate the other side. So I have x minus 2 equals negative 20. And now I solve for x, pretty easy, add 2 to both sides, and I get x equals 22 over here. And on this side, I have x equals negative 18. And both of these would be my answers. So again, for the vast majority of these, we are going to end up with 2 answers, and that is perfectly okay. But I want to talk about the couple different scenarios where we won't. So let's start by looking at this problem right here. X minus 6, absolute value, minus 2 equals negative 2. And we're looking at this and we're like, well, okay, I know how to solve this. First, I'm going to find or isolate my absolute value. So to do that, I just have to add 2 to both sides, and I get the absolute value of x minus 6 equals 0. So I can split this up, ignore the absolute value here, I get x minus 6 equals 0, and on this side, make the other side negative, x minus 6 equals negative 0. But negative 0 is just 0, so this gives me x minus 6 equals 0 again. And if we look, these are the same. So this is a very special case when you get an absolute value equal to 0. So let me write this down. Absolute value equal to 0 means there will be only one solution. There will be only one solution. So to do that, what's going to happen is, since we have both x minus 6 equals 0, I'm just going to write that down. And I end up with x equals 6 after adding 6 to both sides. So make sure you have this right here. This is important. If your absolute value equals 0, there is only one solution. Just keep putting arrows there. Make sure you see it every time you look at these notes. If the absolute value equals 0, there's only one solution. This next part I'm going to do in a reddish color, just because this is the part that if we're going to mess something up, this is what it's going to be. So the last one that I want to show you guys is going to be, we'll do 3x plus 4 equals negative 24. So my first step is going to be to get my absolute value by itself. And I'm going to do that just by dividing both sides by 3. Easy enough. This side cancels. I end up with absolute value of x plus 4 equals negative 8. Now, so far in all of our problems, this side right here has been positive. But now it's negative. So again, what absolute value means is we're going to take whatever is in here and we're going to make it positive. So if I take x plus 4, I make it positive, and then I end up with a negative 8, that doesn't quite make sense. So if you get something like that, if your absolute value equals a negative, we can say there is no solution. And our answer on any problems that have this is that there is no solution. This doesn't mean you don't answer things on a question that I give you. It means that the answer is there is no possible way that when we take an absolute value of something that is like, what was that, x plus 4, there's no way we're going to end up with a negative number. Because of that, this problem has no solution, so our answer is that there's no solution. In any case, I would love it if y'all would check out the lesson practice for me. We're getting real close to lesson 75, and a week after we do lesson 75, we are going to do the test. That is how this works. So please make sure we're looking back at some of the other lessons. If we don't understand something, come talk to me. But do that lesson practice in the back so that we are all ready for class, and I will see you wonderful people tomorrow. Have a great evening.